But first, I would like to introduce our people that are here to talk to us. Brad, would you please give us a 10-second introduction?
My name is Brad Merritt. I'm the game design director for Cartoon Network, or if you've been following all the mergers, we're Discovery Warner Brothers Media now. I've had the pleasure of working on a number of games that foster toxic communities, a fighting game, a team-based shooter, and the granddaddy of all toxicity, a MOBA. So I've had the pleasure of navigating these waters quite a bit.
Isaiah Turner.
Hi everyone, my name's Isaiah. I'm the community lead at Hi-Rez Studios. I've been in the industry for a little bit over 5 years now, and I too have had the pleasure of working in some communities where, you know, toxicity unfortunately kind of thrives. I've worked on games like Smite, which is a MOBA, Paladins, which is a first-person shooter, and then Rogue Company, our newest game, which is a third-person tactical shooter.
Jared from Tripwire.
Hi everyone, I'm the community manager with Tripwire Interactive. I head up the community team here, and I've pretty much worked at Tripwire from the get-go, but I've had the pleasure of watching us grow from a mod team with the original Red Orchestra mod with a very tight-knit, pretty much beautiful and wonderful community, to expanding to a global audience and shipping games worldwide, and all the problems that come with that as we keep on making some awesome games out there, but definitely seen some growing challenges as the internet and gaming itself has expanded.
We have Josh.
Hey everyone, glad to be here. My name is Josh Quinnett. I am the community manager at Gallium Studios, but for the previous 5 years, I did community management and brand management at Blizzard Entertainment. So I've been in the weeds with Heroes of the Storm, StarCraft, Diablo, and a lot of World of Warcraft toward the end of it as well. So this is a topic that's very close to my heart. Thank you.
So I hope that we can hear from her, but Judy, I don't see your video right now. But
Okay, well, if you can hear me, I live on the top of a mountain, and we have a little bit of iffy ISP issues. I'm Judy Tyrer, and I'm the founder of Three Turn Productions. We're the creators of Everjane, the virtual world of Jane Austen. And if you include Plato, I've been in the industry for 45 plus years. If you don't include Plato, which was computer-based,
so hopefully I'm not cutting you off.
If you, I'll shut my video off, and that will help. If you don't include
next
Plato,
we have
I've been in the industry 25 years.
Sorry, there was a little bit of audio overlap with Judy. I wanted to make sure she had finished her introduction. I'm Kat DeShields Moon. I'm the PR manager for Shell Games. I've been in the industry for about 9 years, and I've had the privilege of working on the esports side of things with Skillshot Media, and way back when at Hi-Rez Studios as a community manager for Realm Royale. Hi, Isaiah.
Kim?
Hey folks, I'm Kimberly Younger. I've been a games industry professional for over 20 years now. I started on the art and animation side. I crossed into games and narrative design. And right now I'm working with Oculus, and one of the reasons I'm here is because one of the things that I take a look at when I'm bringing content to the platform are the kinds of communities that different games have created, and what kinds of methodologies are game designers putting into their games to try and to try and maintain those communities and to help sort of keep a lid on toxicity, keep an eye on moderation. What kinds of design choices are they making in order to make those communities thrive rather than just thrash?
Great. So I'd like to open the floor and ask if there are any anecdotes about what has worked and what hasn't. Any takers? Ooh, Brad.
So I want to preamble a little bit. Like, one of the things that I think is important to understand is that just because someone is exhibiting toxic behavior doesn't mean they're a bad person or they are a relentless troll, right? Everyone has a bad day. And when you talk about communities of tens of thousands of people, some percentage of them is going to have a bad day. And just by the law of averages, you are almost guaranteed to run into someone who may be having a bad day. It's kind of like driving in traffic, right? Like everyone forgets to use their turn signal every once in a while, right? Like everyone makes mistakes, but when you're surrounded by hundreds of people, it seems like everyone's an idiot but you. Which leads me to core human behavior too, which is if you're familiar with the fundamental attribution error, means that you judge yourself by your intent and you judge others by your actions. Which means when I make a mistake playing a game, I was trying a new strategy, I'm a little cold, I haven't played in a while, but when you make a mistake in a game, it's because you're an idiot and your whole family should die in a fire. So I do think it's just important to kind of understand that and embrace it. And I actually ran the subreddit for our MOBA, and one of the anecdotes that I think worked for me was just be nice to everyone, regardless of how mean they are to you. We really embrace community feedback. And sometimes people would be incredibly mean, right? To me, specifically. They're like, oh, I can't believe you made this character do 1 point less damage. I hope you die in a fire, and all your family should be killed. And I would respond, I understand your frustration when people change your main character. But here is some data that shows that their win rate is well above 50%. And then a lot of times people would come back and be like, you know what, man, I'm sorry. I was having a bad day. I didn't mean that. I really appreciate you engaging with the community. And just embracing people and trying to be nice can flip them from being a terrible troll to one of your biggest supporters.
So, Kat, you seem to be nodding your head in agreement, I guess. Do you have any thoughts?
I'll be quick because everybody had everything raised, so I don't want to take up too much time. But yeah, no, absolutely. And at Shell, we largely specialize outside of client work in creating single-player experiences in VR. So the community is a huge part of the larger world that the game, for any game, really exists in. And to Brad's point, as a community manager, you're the first point of contact for a lot of people when it comes to being frustrated or upset, about something happening. And community managers have bad days too, right? So it can be very easy for a compound thing to happen. It's like, oh, I don't like your tone. I'm a community manager. I'm gonna say this, that's kind of flippant or, maybe tongue in cheek, and then that person's pissed off, and it just escalates and it's out of control. So, in addition to the community managers affiliated with the studio having a very, very important role in perpetuating non-toxic communities, that attitude, I found it's wonderful when it spreads and you get ambassadors who will jump in on your behalf and correct bad behavior or nip it in the bud or be like, hey, we don't do that here. So TLDR, the community management, like non-toxic experiences in a game, it starts with us, but is perpetuated by the people that come into our neighborhoods around these games. And it's very easy for things to either spiral out of control in a great way or a bad way. But usually as a gatekeeper, we're the first line of defense to set the tone, the culture, for the outside community. So it's wonderfully complex, but so rewarding when it goes right and you establish meaningful relationships with people.
Sure. And I think I missed some of those raised things. So was it... Oh, Jared, you have something to say?
So I kind of want to build on something Kat said before I dive into my own thing because I thought it was so poignant. It's about kind of empowering the community to go forth and take on some of those challenges before it even gets to the community team because it's not like that you're using them as free labor. It's that you're building a community that's helpful to each other, that wants to help others, that wants to help them enjoy the game that you've made. And the more you can do that, and the more you can make them feel heard and understood, the more likely that community is going to go forth and actually, drive that forward and carry that forward into the community for you, and just build a better place that more people want to be in. And then from kind of a gameplay perspective, something we noticed across our titles, both competitive and cooperative, a lot of players, it's not that they don't care about the other members of their team. It's they're kind of out for themselves first, and they're prioritizing their own, life, their own gameplay. It's not that they don't give a crap about, teammate B, teammate C. It's, hey, my focus is on doing this right now, and sorry, you just weren't in that focus. So the more things you can do from a design perspective where other players can interact with you versus that person having to go forth and interact with others, the more it works out, and the less kind of, hey, this class sucks, they never heal, this class, doesn't do the thing they're supposed to do. It's like, no, you just have to walk up to them and hit use, and then, the magical item pops out of them, and that's helpful to you. It's no longer on them to have to manage you.
And I also might add that I still cannot see Judy, so if there are people who can see her and know that she wants to talk, then please. Okay, Judy, please go. It's like I can't hear or see you. I don't know why. It must be the miles.
It's probably my ISP, it always is. Okay, I'm turning off my video so you can really hear me. I would like to add that we talk about putting the rules in our games, but we also need to make sure that our community understands the rules of community engagement. And I think that's one place where it becomes imperative. For me, it's a people-oriented. It's not something you can do with bots. You have to have the people in there engaging with the community early and saying, excuse me, but that's not appropriate. And given that we were a Regency period game, it made it so much easier because a lot of modern terminology simply cannot be used. I'm sorry, it's inappropriate. You're not role-playing correctly. But we always had someone in the world, kind of a constant presence, who may or may not have been actually sitting at his terminal, but he was in the world and you never knew. And that helped. And it kind of just, even though it was an avatar and you weren't really sure if there was a person there or if the avatar was just hanging out, it did help kind of remind people there are rules.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew, for helping out with that. Was there any more stories that people wanted to convey? Okay, Isaiah.
Yeah, I was just going to build off what Judy was saying, and one of the things that we found most helpful at Hi-Rez is just having a clear and concise code of conduct for how we expect our players to act in the community, and getting that set up and visible and screaming it from the mountaintops as early as we can when we're building new communities. In free-to-play games, it's just an open door for anyone to come in, and if there's no expectation on how to behave, it's really hard for players to just come in and just have no idea on how to engage with each other. So having something from the developer side or the community management side of, hey, welcome to our community, here's how we expect you to treat each other, as a reference point. That way players, have a clear expectation on how to behave before engaging with the community.
Josh?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been shared so far. I wanted to add that in addition to community guidelines, rules, expectations, there is, I think, a huge impact that an individual game's brand voice has on the way that its community interacts with one another. So while I think having a good community guideline document is really important, what's also important is when you're conducting yourself as a community manager, whether it's on Reddit, forums, Discord, what have you, or even your social media content on behalf of the brand should reflect the type of community that you're trying to build. should be uplifting, should be, I think that if you're a snarky brand that is even putting down trolls in a negative way, you're inviting that kind of behavior back to you, I think. So reflecting the community in all of your publishing efforts beyond just the one-to-one community management stuff, I think is a really important factor as well.
Was Judy wanting to say something again? Oh, okay, Kim.
I just wanted to add, first of all of this is excellent. And all of these are the kinds of stuff that we definitely look to see brands and community managers participating in. Empowering the community to decide who they want to be and how they want to interact, I think, is a big key element. The other thing to note is establishing patterns of behavior. Positive patterns of behavior over time engender more positive patterns of behavior. And, as was mentioned early on, everybody can have a bad day. Everybody can have a couple of bad days. But when every single day is a bad day over and over and over again over time, then, somebody needs to be, pulled aside. Somebody needs to be taken seriously. Somebody needs to be talked to. And, those are the moments that can help sort of kick a community one way or the other. And I think it's very cool to hear everybody sort of discussing this at sort of a higher level.
Exactly. So my next question is about perhaps preventing some of these negative behaviors. Is there anything we can do maybe as game designers to incentivize our players to go more toward the desirable behaviors or positive behaviors rather than the behaviors that we don't want them to do prior to, launch? Or even after launch, if the community manager happens to notice, like, well, they're doing this, like, what can we do that can address these sort of issues? I see Brad wants to speak.
Okay, sorry, I could talk about a million things. I'll try not to hog all the time, but one of the things that we did on our MOBA that I thought actually was counterintuitive, but then once we sort of identified it, it actually made things a lot better, which at this one point in game development, we started introducing a lot of sort of quality of life features that just made things way easier for players. Like, for example, they could click on the mini map and their character would auto run there. And that would give them time to pan around and look at a lot of things and whatnot. However, we noticed people's toxic behavior starts shooting way up. And what we sort of came to was that when you have downtime in a game, that gives you the opportunity to look at everyone else. And again, that fundamental attribution error, everyone's an idiot but you. And so we actually backed off a lot of these sort of like, let's make things overly easy on the player. And we just ask ourselves, like, is this going to create a lot of downtime for players? And when we backed out sort of those downtime behaviors, toxicity went way back down. And because it's like people are so engaged in what they're doing and, worrying about staying alive minute to minute instead of panning around and worrying about like everyone else. And I mean, you need some aspect of that, right, in a team-based game. But it was just interesting that we sort of removed these good standard features for MOBAs, and it led to less toxic behavior. I have 20 other stories if no one else has something to say. But like game mechanic wise, one of the things that I'm most proud of design wise, I give myself a big pat on the back, is we did a team-based shooter. And again, this is games for like kids, right? But we're focusing on sort of that Nintendo sweet spot where like 10-year-olds love it, but 20-year-olds love it too. And in our team-based shooter, we really flipped the script. And when you killed someone, not killed, you stunned them, Instead of respawning back to a spawn point, where people could be spawn camped and things like that, the character was just stunned into a bubble for a short period of time. And then when they dropped out of that bubble, they were invincible and actually powered up for a short period of time. And so took people a little bit to understand that. You would see people stun someone in a bubble and then stand right next to them waiting for them to drop out of the bubble, and then they would immediately get killed by the person who just dropped out of the bubble. But once people sort of adapted to this new paradigm of the way kills worked in a shooter, there is no spawn camping. There is no griefing. And it actually radically changed map navigation, right? There are no best spots on the map, because the best spot on the map after you just killed someone becomes incredibly dangerous for everyone else. So it created, these interesting heat maps where there were just almost very, very little, too much focus in one area being good to camp for people, because you could camp at once and then you need to move. So those are a couple interesting design mechanics that we did that worked out really well.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because a designer would be aiming to make things easier for the player and think of that as a good thing, and yet it led to a very negative response within the community, just as a side effect of what happened. But usually we think of griefing happening in competitive games like the ones that you're talking about. I've heard that there's griefing also in cooperative games. Is there someone who can address sort of that kind of situation? Jared?
So one of the titles I'm proud to work on, and franchises really, is Killing Floor and Killing Floor 1 and 2. And something we noticed early on, and something I had to kind of teach QA and the design team about, is like, hey, our players are not just cooperating with each other. They're doing things because it's funny, like locking people outside of a door they just closed, and then all the baddies are on that side of the door with them and they can't get in. And obviously it's funny for everybody who's on the safe side of the door, but it sucks to be the person on the other side of the door. And I pluses and minuses, we never quite addressed that one, because it is kind of funny, and it's not insurmountable, but it's griefing and trolling your fellow teammates is something you can see in a wide spectrum of games. So it's something you have to always keep into account. It's not just something that's going to come up in competitive titles.
Tim?
One of the things I wanted to note as well is, for groups of friends or groups of teams who play together regularly, griefing is a common part of those games. It's not intended in a negative fashion. I've watched friends playing Halo who spend a half an hour of their gameplay time running over each other with the Warthog, because it's just frickin' funny after 20 minutes, and it becomes a little tricky to figure out where the line is, right? Where if you've got a team that's just all sort of banging on each other, do you have a toxic member in the team, or is this just 5 friends who have been playing this game for far too long and are like, watch this physics trick, or watch this new cool thing, and oh, I'm sorry you died, but wasn't this awesome? And so walking that line when you're trying to manage these groups can sometimes be a little bit tricky and take a little bit of experience on the part of a community manager.
Judy, what do you have to say?
I wanted to add a Second Life anecdote, because that's not just a cooperative game, it's a user-generated content game. And it's also a game which has its own legal department because of the interface between Linden dollars and US dollars and the sheer number of businesses that actually run on Second Life. And so that's when it becomes a much more challenging way. And what we did, and I would highly recommend every company do, is I was in charge of what server changes were going in every week, and I was at the community manager meeting every week, because that's the person who knows where the problems lie. So when we got somebody who discovered how to open a box that could completely crash the sim because it was a recursive box that opened and opened and opened and opened, and it just flooded the sim with stuff. And then they sold it. And so now all these people own these boxes that can crash everyone's sims. So you have to make sure that you have the decision makers on the development side talking to your community managers. So, and that, because Second Life is pretty much as cooperative as it gets. I can tell wonderful stories from that one. The day the Mirus were dying from counterfeit food, trying to explain that to someone in Washington, D.C. who doesn't understand virtual worlds is probably one of the most amusing things ever. Wait, these animals that don't exist are dying because they're eating counterfeit food that doesn't exist. And it just was beyond amusing. I'll hush now.
Okay, thank you, Judy. I wish I could hear everything. But we talked about griefing in competitive and cooperative games. Has anyone had experience using a bot? I mean, for it, I can assume that when you have millions of players that you want somebody to help you out. Mostly I've heard of bots being used to filter words and things like that, but are there companies out there using these things? I see Brad raising his hand.
Can I build on something really quick that Kimberly reminded me of?
Okay.
About the last topic? Kimberly, you were saying creating groups for friends to grief each other. That was actually something we did in our MOBA. Originally, we had this very streamlined queuing system that would just prioritize speed. But we discovered like so many people from the subreddit just wanted to grief each other. We made custom games essentially for them, so they could go grief each other. But the flip side is, too, we discovered there were a lot of really casual players. So kind of dovetailing into this, we made a bot version where you could just play against bots, because there were a lot of people who weren't very good and weren't very competitive, but they absolutely loved playing the game. And so we made these custom rooms for crazy hardcore people to grief each other, but we also made these hyper casual bot rooms, and people just loved it. So we use bots in that way, but another way that one of the things that we've found to be pretty effective is what we call gray listing, where, again, dealing with kids, there's whitelisting, right, which, only allows certain terms, right? And then there's blacklisting, which allows everything but what's on the blacklist. But one of the things that we do is what we call gray listing. And, when you type something that's blacklisted, usually it'll say like, your mom is a star, right? But the chat prints that for everyone to see. But what we do with gray listing is if you type, your mom is a star, you see it, but no one else does. And so the sort of like psychological theory behind this is if I type, hey everybody, what's up? And everyone sees that and everyone says, hi Brad, it's great. And then I type, your mom is a star, and that goes into the chat and I see it, but no one else sees it. So no one else responds, right? So now you're sort of doing this operant conditioning to your users where they'll be like, well, if I say mean things, no one responds. But if I say nice things, people do. And, that's been pretty successful for us.
Okay. I see Jared has something to say.
I just wanted to kind of add on to that because that works outside of games as well, in places where, like, if you have official forums and you have some tools there that you may not have in places like Reddit. But for some of the, I'm going to call them just truly bad actors, the ones who are there and get their joy from ruining somebody else's, good time. That's all they're there for, and they exist out there across a wide spectrum of games. If they can't get the reaction they're looking for, it's not fun for them anymore.
Anyone else have something to add? Oh, Josh.
I just wanted to add, not as a designer's perspective, but as someone who's picked up on this from a number of games that I've played recently, thinking about the types of interactions that are available to your players, whether it's cooperative or competitive. A good example that comes to mind for me is, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Deep Rock Galactic, but this is a 4-player cooperative game that's often played with strangers. But the community is overwhelmingly positive. And one of the things that I attribute to that is that it has a lot of opportunities for the players to interact that are super low key, but just straight up positive. For example, you just hit the V button, I think, on your keyboard, and the characters will shout out like their team motto, rock and stone. And it's kind of like this wireless high five to the rest of the team. And I guarantee you, if you go into a Deep Rock Galactic game right now and say rock and stone, every player in the game is going to repeat that to you. And all of a sudden, off of kind of a funny little beat, all of you are on the same page. We're all literally rallying together before we start this thing, and it creates a much more positive environment. I think we also see that in ways that you can communicate with your team or even your opponents outside of text and voice-based communication. I think the ability to, for example, like Apex, I think move the bar forward by allowing people to ping items for their team. Shields here, weapon over here that you might need, and it's a way for me to say to my team, or to help them without having to expose my voice or to type, and it gets an interaction that is wholly positive. And I think it builds that camaraderie really early, whether you even notice it's happening or not.
Those are great design sort of add-ons that people can think about. Kat?
Judy had her minion or whatever she had up first. So Judy, if you wanted to go first, feel free.
Okay. Judy, do you want to go?
Let Kat go.
No, that was an excellent point, Josh, that you made. And I kind of want to piggyback off of that just a little bit, like with like the small, like very early things like that you use in game design. Can influence like the community and onwards moving forward. I am not a game designer. I admire all of the game designers out there, but that is not my area of expertise. But speaking to something that we do at Shell for our single player experiences, a lot in our original IP, a lot of what we do is an extension of our company mission statement. So pretty much it's like create experiences we're proud of with people that we like to make the world a better place. So that kind of feeds into a lot of like the thinking behind how we create games. And one of the core things that we always want to do is empower the players that engage with our games, and we don't ever want them to feel stupid. So some of the things that we do early on is, for Until You Fall, which is a neon sword fighting VR game. Lots of movement, big swings. We have to tell people to hydrate, but we can do standing or seated, so it doesn't matter, if you're, wheelchair bound, you can still have a really epic sword god experience, playing this game. And Until You Fall, we also have 4 different difficulty settings. So if you're not, this VR is new, you're having a hard time, you're trying to find your way, there's a setting for you. If you're in nightmare mode, you got it, you're just kind of hack and slashing your way through this thing, but it creates a safe place for all level types of casual players to the hardcore ones to have a place to engage with the game and draw great experiences from. And from, for I Expect You to Die, which is a puzzle game, there are multiple solves for every puzzle that's in there. So you can be super creative or you can be super basic. It doesn't matter like how you approach the game. There's something there for everybody at different levels. And we kind of augment this in the community side of things. So similar to the call in, I'm sorry, Josh, I'm blanking on the name, the game that you just said where they had the Blood and Stone, Rock and Stone, was it?
Yeah.
Yes, that. Yes. So like a rally, so we have factions for Until You Fall. So we have 4 different factions and people are, oh man, this is me, and there's like these built-in community points of like where people rally and come together from a single player game experience. The community becomes the multiplayer experience, with different challenges and tournaments. And all of these people from different skill levels, from time spent in the game to, some of the loot that they collected to how fast they get through the levels, all of that's kind of equalized through the challenges, and we bring those nightmare mode and those beginners together to do fun things in the same faction. So some of the right out the gate decisions that you make when it comes to putting something in a game can wildly influence how the community comes out of that experience and then interacts with each other once they've completed.
Wow.
that.
So, it sounds like you need to cater to each type of player. And something the designers should be thinking about, that, you have these hyper casual players and then you have these super involved players and they all want something a little bit different. How can designers work with community managers to think about, designing for the community inside the game and outside the game? Okay, Judy, will you go?
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback on and answer it, but at the same time, one thing, I'm in the multiplayer universe, always. And one thing I wanted to point out is that if you want people to participate in the community, that has to be built into your gameplay. And I know, like, in some, they go, okay, now you have to go find a partner. And, like, that's just panic time, okay? So one of the things you have to do is recognize different people in game design have different communication skills. So our first multiplayer quest in Everjane, you got to go to a funeral and you were supposed to smile at someone at the funeral. And that's all you had to do. You just had to click on them and push smile. You didn't have to talk to them. You didn't have to, but it gave people an opportunity to begin these different storylines with other people they'd never met. But piggybacking on what you said on different groups, you have to understand in multiplayer, everyone communicates differently, and some people really are scared and they don't want to reach out, and you have to build the gameplay that reaches out for them and brings them into the community.
Okay. Does anyone want to respond to Judy and what she said? Kat?
Just really quickly, I love that sentiment, Judy, that you said, create an experience that reaches out and pulls them in. Like, that is beautiful. I think if there's ever a manifesto for game designers and community managers, that should definitely be one of them.
Right. So let's... Oh, Brad. Okay. I saw Jared too.
I think one of the important things to realize is, generally speaking, when your community gives you feedback, they're going to give you a solution. And they're going to be like, you should make this character more powerful. You should make this rifle more powerful. Rarely are people going to step back and identify the problem and then leave it up to you and the design team to solve. And so what's great is when community managers can be like, hey, there's these 10 comments people are making. Do this, do this, do this, do this. I think these 10 things have the same single problem, and people are just presenting multiple solutions to this one problem. So when people can take in feedback and then actually identify, like, okay, what's the actual problem that's causing all this feedback, and then, like, hey, let's work with the team as a whole to figure out the problem, like, that's always super important to me. And we also work with, like, a number of external game development vendors, and I always myself try to do that, right? Like, when there's a problem with a game that someone's working on, I try to just tell them the problem and let them fix it instead of just me giving them a solution to fix it. But it's the same thing between the community managers, and developers.
Jared, did you have something to add?
Yeah, to a couple of these past comments. Just to step back, it's definitely something we saw, and we didn't take it into heart as early on as we could about how we needed to incorporate community building into actions in the game and just mechanics of the game and how they can communicate with each other. And it's something that it's now when we start thinking about new games and like building the technical foundations, one of the things that we've had meetings on is like, okay, how is the community going to use this? How are they going to interact with each other? And those weren't conversations we had 10 years ago. So that's definitely something that's come much more into the forefront. And I think it's something that's just going to keep being something that's going to have to be built upon because it's ever changing. And then to kind of build off of what Brad was saying, there's a lot of things. I would say my day-to-day outside of everything else that I do is serving as that translator between the community. And this might sound bad, and that's why I don't say it publicly too much, but I'll say it here. Listen to your community when they tell you they hate something, because they know when they hate something. Don't necessarily listen to them when they tell you how to fix it, because they aren't game designers at heart for the most part. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are some great ideas out there, and you have to be on the, keep your eye out for them. But you have to find the root cause, and you have to get that back into an actionable format for the designers and the engineers to look at. And that makes it so much more useful and so much more actionable for the team to more quickly turn around and present something back to the community, and even communicate that out to the fans. Like, hey, we see you guys saying this, but that might not actually work out the way you guys think it will. You guys aren't seeing what's underneath that code. If we change this will break. This thing you're not even thinking about will be completely busted. It could be gameplay, it could be mechanical, but it's not something they're thinking about day to day.
Right. I totally agree with that sentiment that a lot of players are very connected to their situation, their character, and how things will affect their play, and not looking at the full picture of, how this change that they recommend will affect some of the other players. So I think that is, you do need maybe like a community whisperer to be able to translate what's really going on. But the feedback you get is very valuable to have that. But I have heard that, the majority of the community can be silent and they're not on the forums. So how do we relate to those silent players who may not be the squeaky wheel or the loud complainers who are on the forums? Jared?
Well, I'm sure I'm not going to be the only one to say things here, but and that's something you're going to run into every day working with communities, because I'm doing what they're doing. Everybody represents everybody on the internet when they speak. I'm representing all of community managers right now. My game player is representing every player in the game. And that's just how people present themselves. Oftentimes verbally, other times just with the intent. They think they speak for everybody when they don't. You have a million different players, you have a million different perspectives. You have 5 different designers, you have 5 different design intents, and hopefully, somebody who's driving it all together and making it all work. Because that's how gameplay ends up being, great at the end of the day. And it's something you have to keep into account, and you have to try and reach those players who aren't talking to you. Because you often get what we call a storm in a teacup, and it's 5 players yelling at each other back and forth about how bad this problem is. And you're like, guys, while this thread has 1,000 posts, there's 5 of you. We have 1 million players who are pretty happy, and they're not saying anything on the subject, and you don't actually speak for them, even though you say you do. And we learned that lesson pretty early on as a young game company some 15 odd years ago, where we listened to the vote. They're like, hey, this system sucks, you need to change it. We changed it. And then all of a sudden, everybody who was silent was angry. And there was a lot more of them.
I just had a real
Judy?
quick... Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay, Josh, you can. say your really quick thing.
Just a really quick addition to what Jared said. I'm going to lose my train of thought because I interrupted you, Judy. I apologize. Well, you know what? Why don't we pass it to Judy and come back to me while I try to remember what it was I was going to say. Thank you.
Okay. Judy, please.
No problem. I totally relate. I was going to say that again, we create events, we create opportunities for the quiet people to get involved. We do, and we have to do what we do in regular business meetings. We have to shut up. That's me. I'm the one who has to shut up. But we have to just look and say, Kimberly, I'm using you. What do you have to say? Because we notice that this person isn't talking. And sometimes there's just people who aren't going to talk unless you say their name. So we need to have, and that's where quests and community management events and Christmas parties and carriage races, whatever kinds of planned events you have, helps bring those people out. And some people are never going to talk because they just don't. And that's when the rest of us get our extra chance.
Yeah, I remembered what it was now. Apologies. I think that as a community manager, we often think about how we can guide and educate our community. I think there's an opportunity for that to go the other way toward the development team as well. We've talked about, a runaway topic on a Reddit thread about a balance issue or something like that, and how that doesn't necessarily represent the overall opinion of your community. In my experience, sometimes it's helpful to share that context with the development team that's making the decisions. Like in my experience, developers do spend a lot of time reading their game subreddit or reading the discussion channels relevant to their game, and that can be really stressful. One of the traits that I think is imperative for a community manager is having thick skin, and we don't always expect the developers and artists and other folks on the team to be prepared for that as well. So when a topic is breaking away and becoming very toxic, or it isn't productive, sometimes it can be helpful to come back to your development team with context saying, okay, I realize that this is at the top of the subreddit today, but here's a picture of the other conversations that are happening in this community. Here are the dozens of other streamers that are participating in the game in a positive way that don't align with this feedback. So, Twitter is not representative of the overall player base that we're speaking to right now, that kind of thing. Providing that context and sometimes coming in with numbers to back it up can help lower the temperature of conversation happening on the development team and help you drive toward a better solution, as opposed to panicking and coming up with a knee-jerk reaction in order to meet the needs of a very small subset.
Okay, Brad, and also, we're almost about to end, so we will go around and ask for last thoughts after this.
Yeah, just to build on Josh, that's what I think, tempering feedback, but also representing the silent majority is use data, right? There are, and you can identify like silent majority problems with data. We had this one player in our game. He literally played more than anyone else. Never heard a peep out of this guy. But whenever he was losing in a game, he'd quit. And everyone hated him. Everyone knew who he was, and everyone hated him. But this person must have played 10 hours a day since the day the game came out. It was insane. But it's like one of those things where it's like, okay, well, maybe people feel, even though we don't see people complaining about it that much, when they feel that they're losing, how do we address like some people quitting and things like that? But it's like also too, yeah, it's like if 1% of people are complaining about something, but 99% of people aren't, balance that with, we always, I think there's a Blizzard talk about balancing Overwatch where it's about what is the community feedback? What does the actual data say? And then how does it feel? Because sometimes things can feel balanced, or some things will be balanced, but they feel unbalanced. And I think it's that trifecta of addressing things that is most effective.
Isaiah, any last thoughts?
No, yeah, I definitely agree with everything that's been said today. But one last thing that I just wanted to bring up when talking about toxicity in communities and games, we do a lot about thinking about ways to combat toxicity, but I think it's also equally important to think about ways to promote positivity. Sometimes you can make just as much, if not even more progress towards the problem when you encourage people and reward players for being positive.
Right. That's a very important point. Jared, any last thoughts?
Kind of just to build on what Isaiah said, it's best to let players know that they're heard. Even when, you don't necessarily agree with them, maybe the studio doesn't agree with them, but let them know that they're heard. Let them know that they're not shouting into an empty vacuum, because players' perception become the reality they believe in. And if they think they're being ignored and not listened to, they hate you for it, even when you are considering all those points. And to kind of build on that, like, try and capture as much data as you can from those silent players. Gather stats from gameplay. Do anonymous polls. Try and pick up everything you can from those players who aren't directly engaging with you on a day-to-day basis, because it's all going to be useful and help separate what's really happening out there.
Josh, any last words?
Yeah, so I completely agree with everything Sim said. I appreciate the opportunity to be part of this. One note as someone who's been doing community management for a while is that I think in the modern age, our players can see through spin. And when you're communicating with them, whether it's in response to a negative or a positive, acknowledge that. And there might be a desire to say the standard, we hear your feedback and blah, 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 to promote, like they've heard that 1,000 times. And it doesn't just mean that you need to mix up that messaging. Talk to them like a human, because the marketing message doesn't really convey, I think, what a community manager would be conveying in that context, if that makes sense.
Yes. So Judy will go and then Kat.
I think the one thing that hasn't been brought up, and it's not a real upbeat ending, so I apologize, is that sometimes a member of the community is your game. It really is your game. And the bigger the industry gets, the more true that is. And sometimes there's somebody, and you may love them, and they may be a whale, but in the long run, it's just better to let them go. And I think we need to recognize when we have the kind of player, it's just best to bring the band hammer down for the benefit of everyone else who's involved. And so I just thought we hadn't said that, so I said it.
Kat?
Yeah, no, I mean, everybody with such wonderful insights, learned a lot from this roundtable. Closing thoughts, I say, piggybacking off of what Josh said, get your devs involved with the community. So your community managers, they can't hold down the fort all on their own all the time. I understand that a lot of developers may not want to be in the thick of it, but even if it's just one day a month for an hour or two, where you have your development team, they come into your Discord, it's an AMA, but it's just for your immediate community that's engaging with your game, and having that conversation point. When we do stuff like that, we have a separate chat group just for the team members, so that if a difficult question comes up, we're all on the same page in terms of, okay, yeah, we're not really ready to answer that yet, but we're still giving authentic, non-spin, responses, because, to Josh's point, gamers, they can sniff BS like that. It's ridiculous. And the same old marketing messaging is very different from human communication. And that is a hard lesson to learn if you haven't learned it. So just take it from us. But getting devs on the front line, like where they're interacting with community, not only is it a great experience in terms of the dialogue and the questions and the answers that can come from it, but it can be a great experience for the players as well, because it's like, okay, you're not just giving me these canned answers, you're talking to me and you're listening and you're engaging. And a lot of the devs that we've brought on for those things, they hang out in Discord all the time now, and they're like, hey, can we share this news with the community? And like, yeah, go for it. So it can be a very, very positive
Definitely
thing.
The community wants to know that they're being heard. Kim, any last words?
You know what? I'm just gonna kind of sort of riff off of what Kat was saying. Is that those kinds of experiences when the community feels they're being heard and listened to, when they get a chance to interact with the devs, even occasionally, it's a ripple effect that goes out into the broader community. So even if you just have a small group of people on your Discord that maybe do these interactions, that positivity then gets carried outward, and it gets out even into people who aren't on the Discord, even people who are elsewhere in the community. Sometimes your greatest champions are the people who do get heard, and the people who do feel like they're being taken seriously. And you know, when they get that validation, you'll find over time they're more willing to listen to the reasons that maybe something isn't the way they want it to be. And they can take that and they can become a voice for the greater project, as opposed to just the voice for their particular wants or their particular desires in the game.
Okay, so it looks like we're at the end. I want to thank all of you for joining me today and talking about this topic. So thank you very much. Wave bye-bye. And we will move on to the next of the schedule.
Thank you very much, Sande Chen, and all our roundtable participants. That was a great one today. I've been going to GDC since it was CGDC. The main reason to go is the roundtables, and this was definitely up there with the best I have attended all through those years of attending. So thanks, all of you.